Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. So I read 95 books so far this year, so in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my favorite books, my biggest disappointments. We are going to be doing the Mid-Year Freakout Tag. Alright guys, so I do this tag every year and it kind of serves as a mid-year wrap-up, just reflecting on the books I read in the first half of the year. So I will be talking about some of my favorite books, some of my biggest disappointments, some new fictional crushes, and things like that. So I'm so excited to talk about these books with you guys. Most of these books are either fantasy romance or contemporary romance, dark romance, and yeah, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram and Goodreads, both linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's get into the tag questions. The first question is, what is the best book you've read so far in 2023? So this was incredibly challenging, but I did end up picking Manacled by Senlin Yu. So Manacled is Dramini meets Handmaid's Tale fan fiction, and it is absolutely epic. This was the first fan fiction I ever read. I will definitely be reading more in the future. This book was just so good. So if you're unfamiliar with the plot of Manacled, we are following Hermione, and it's essentially what would have happened if Harry Potter lost the war against Voldemort. So Hermione ends up being taken out of isolation and finds out that she is going to be part of Voldemort's breeding program because witches are having trouble conceiving children. So Hermione, being a very powerful witch, is going to be given to the High Reeve, who is Voldemort's second in command. And when she gets to the house, she realizes it's Malfoy Manor, and the High Reeve is actually Draco Malfoy, and it is their romance, and it is everything. It is so good. This book is incredibly dark. Know that going in. Check trigger warnings. It's also over 1,000 pages. It's very long. However, I feel like that length is necessary to get the story that we get. I don't think there's any parts of this book that I would omit. This story is amazing. And if you like touch her and you die and just like that dark obsession type of mailman character, you're gonna get that with Draco. This story is so good. So I actually listened to this via Audiobook Warriors on Spotify and on YouTube, but you can read it on the website Archive of Our Own, which I will have linked down in the description below. But I highly recommend, if you have not checked out Manacled yet, definitely do so. And next up is, what is the best sequel you've read in 2023? This was unbelievably easy, unlike that last question, and that is The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. So I have talked about this book a lot on my channel, so I'm sure you are all very sick of it. However, this is my favorite YA fantasy romance series at the moment. The romance in this is so unbelievably good and just angsty and kiss already, and I'm obsessed. So if you're unfamiliar with The Ballad of Never After, I really can't go into this because it is the sequel, but the first book, Once Upon a Broken Heart, is following Evangeline Fox, and she is this girl that is desperately in love with her best friend. However, her best friend is about to marry her stepsister. So Evangeline is super distraught, and she decides she is going to make a deal with a fate. Now, in this world, it is known you don't make deals with fates. It always turns out badly. However, Evangeline is just so desperate, she decides to make a deal with Jax, the Fate of Broken Hearts, or the Prince of Broken Hearts. And it is known that his kiss is deadly. And Jax says, hey, I will stop this wedding, but in doing so, I want you to kiss 3 people of my choosing. So Evangeline agrees, and the story goes from there. So I love the world that this story takes place in. It is so fairy tale-esque and whimsical, and also the romance. It's so, so good. It's so good. Just trust me on this. It's amazing, and I cannot wait for the next book, A Curse of True Love, to come out. I'm gonna read that book the day it releases, because this book ends on like a crazy cliffhanger, and I need to know what happens next. So if you have not read this book yet, definitely do so. It is absolutely amazing. And next up is, what is a new release that you haven't read yet? So unfortunately, I have a very long list of books that I haven't picked up yet because they haven't been released via audio, and I primarily listen to books via audio. So luckily, I feel like a lot more indie books are being turned into audio and are coming out the same day the books release. However, there are a few that I'm still waiting on. So 2 that really stood out were The Ashes and The Star-Cursed King. I recently finished Serpent in the Wings of Night last month, and I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. So I'm so excited to pick this book up. Unfortunately, the audio I don't believe is going to be released until August, And I think I saw prior to filming this that it might have even gotten pushed back further, so I have to check into that. But I cannot wait to read this. And then the other one is Lord of Gold and Glory, which is the sequel to A Court of Blood and Bindings, which is another 5-star fantasy romance read this year that I absolutely loved. And next up is, what is the most anticipated release for the second half of the year? This was impossible, so I narrowed it down to 3. So first up we have A Fall of Wrath and Ruin by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is going to be the first book in a new fantasy romance series, and I've really enjoyed From Blood and Ash and the prequel series, and then other books by J. Law. So I am sure I will absolutely love this. I don't know very much about it. I'm pretty sure it involves like gods and this girl that I think is going up against like different gods in different cities. That's super vague. I have to look more into it, but it sounds really good. And like I said, I like most of the books I read by this author. So then after that, I also want to read Gold by Raven Kennedy. So this is the final book in the Plated Prisoner series. I'm so looking forward to, but also kind of concerned of how this book is going to go. So if you're unfamiliar with the Plated Prisoner series, we are following Auren, and she's this girl that lives in Midas's castle, and Midas has the power to turn things into gold, and he has gold-touched Auren. So he pretty much has her in a cage. She is his gilded pet, and he likes just to show her off, and Auren has absolutely no autonomy. She just doesn't care about anything in the first book besides pleasing Midas, and as the series progresses, she really grows as a character. And at the end of the last book that was released, she is really put in a tough situation, and I really cannot wait to see how she is going to handle things in this last book. So I cannot wait for that book to come out. I'm pretty sure it's releasing in December. And then last up, so Kate Stewart just announced she is going to be releasing an entire book from Dom's POV, Dom being a character in the Ravenhood series, which is one of my favorite contemporary romance series. So I actually ordered the special edition Kate Stewart Ravenhood box, and it was supposed to have a long chapter from Dom's POV, which is part of the reason why I even ordered that box. And it looks like that chapter has now turned into a full-length book. So I am so nervous to read that book, but also I cannot wait because I love Dom. He is my favorite boy of summer from that series. So I am eagerly anticipating and also kind of scared to pick that book up. And next up is biggest disappointment. So I would like to preface this by saying this has been the best reading year I have ever had. I've had so many 5-star reads. So my biggest disappointment is actually still a 2.5 star, which isn't bad. And that is Requiem by Kelly Hart. And honestly, this book is not bad at all. It's just it's a me thing, and I can't even get into why I dislike this book because it's going to give away a huge spoiler. It just features a trope that I despise, and it just ended up being vastly different than what I was expecting going into it. So I was expecting it to be like a very dark, revenge-driven enemies to lovers story, and that is not what it ended up being. But overall, I don't think it was still a decent book. I still give it 2.5 stars despite the fact it has a trope that I absolutely hate. So I'm very sorry, Tori. I know this is one of your favorite books ever, but overall, it didn't work for me, but I do think there are people out there that'll really, really love this book. And this next question was super easy. It is biggest surprise, and I immediately thought of Ensnared by Tiffany Roberts. So this is a monster romance, and if you're familiar with my channel, you know that I've had really, really bad luck when it comes to monster romances. So I did a collab with Jen from the Book Refuge, and she picked out this book for me to read, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. So this is following Catan and Ivy, and Catan, our love interest, is a giant alien spider, and he ends up discovering Ivy, and it is their romance, and it is pretty much them just kind of learning about each other, learning how to communicate with each other, because obviously this giant alien spider does not speak English, and it is just their beautiful romance, and it is so, so good. I never thought I'd get to a part where I'd be like, oh my god, I just want this spider and this human to kiss already. What is taking so long? I will say this is unbelievably slow burn. Nothing really happens till the very end of this book, which I feel like is very different for like monster romances. But yeah, I was not expecting to absolutely love this book. So if you are trying to get into monster romance, I definitely think you should give this a try. I know it seems kind of intimidating because it is a giant spider, and personally, I hate spiders, but for some reason, this book just worked for me. Next up is, what is a favorite new to you author that you discovered this year? So I immediately thought of Neva Atai, who writes the Perfectly Imperfect Mafia romance series. I recently read the first 2 books in the series. I'm waiting for the rest to come out via audio. and I loved them. They are so good. These romances are epic, and I read both of these books in a day. They are just absolutely amazing. So this first story is Painted Scars, and we are following the head of the Russian mafia, or the Bratva, and he has recently been in a car accident that has caused him to be in a wheelchair. So his inner circle decides that he should fake marry someone and make it look like he's about to have an heir, so that way more people won't be as likely to try to kill him. So he ends up finding out, or the head ends up finding out, that someone has embezzled money from him, and that person actually has a very attractive daughter who is amazing at acting. So she agrees to marry the head of the Russian Bratva in order to save her father's life, and it is their romance. Now, on top of all of this, she is also dealing with PTSD after having a terrible relationship. So besides their epic romance, we're also watching these two people help heal each other, and it is just a beautiful story. And then the second book in the series, Broken Whispers, is just as good. We are following the general of the Russian Bratva that we actually meet in this book, and he ends up being in an arranged marriage with this ballerina who was also in an accident that caused her to not be able to use her voice. So it is their love story. Both books, absolutely epic, and I cannot wait to continue with this series. Next up is newest fictional crush. So this was impossible. I've developed a lot of crushes over the last 6 months. I was able to narrow it down to 2. So first up, we have Xaden from Fourth Wing. So Xaden. As soon as he entered this book, I knew he was going to be my favorite character. Black hair, covered in tattoos, kind of has that like brooding personality, and is able to use crazy shadow powers that can kill everyone. So he's essentially a baby Rhysand, and I am all about it. He is my favorite character in this book. I just want the best for him, and as long as he survives at the end of this series, I will be happy. And then the other character who is kind of similar is Creon from A Court of Blood and Bindings, also known as the Silent Death. I need him to get an HEA. He has been through so much, and he is a tortured soul that just no one has ever loved. And I need him to get love, I need him to be happy, and someone needs to protect him. So those are my top 2. Also, honorable mention, Draco from Manifold, and then I completely forget his name, Riordan from Serpent and the Wings of Night. Next up is an emotional read or a book that made you cry. So I actually have 2 for this. So they are both contemporary romance. First up, we have June 1st by Jennifer Hartman. So this is actually an age gap step-sibling romance, and upon hearing that, you probably wouldn't think, oh, that's a really like emotional and sad book. Let me tell you, I was listening to this book, I had to pull over because I was crying so much. There are parts in this book that they will hurt your soul. So we are following this boy that when he is very young, he has to move in with his best friend, and his best friend's mother has just given birth to a baby girl. So he pretty much makes it his mission to protect her and take care of her, and that sibling love kind of eventually turns into a romance, and it goes from there. But our main character goes through a lot in his life at a very young age, and we kind of get to see how that turns him into the person he is at the end of this book. And it is a beautiful story. I highly recommend. I absolutely loved it. And then the other book I recently read, and that is Heartbreak Warfare. So this book, I've compared it to Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. It has a similar vibe. I would definitely check trigger warnings, but we are essentially following this girl that is married, happily married to her husband. She has a young son, and she just has the perfect life. She decides to re-enlist and ends up being deployed. And she enters her deployment in love with her husband and comes back in love with someone else. So during the time that she was deployed, she ends up being captured. So we get to see her as a prisoner of war. And then she's also captured along with another soldier. And it's like their connection. And this book has a love triangle. I don't even want to call it a love triangle, but our main character has to decide between her husband or this soldier that she shared this traumatic event with. And it's heartbreaking because both the guys in this book are wonderful human beings. So watching her make a choice and hurt one of them it was gut-wrenching. So I loved this book. I have no plans to ever read it again because of how heartbreaking it was. But if you want to cry, I highly recommend picking up either of these books. Next up is a book that made you happy. And I actually took some liberties with this question. So instead of a book that made me happy, I will say rereads made me happy, and more specifically, rereads and read-alongs with friends. So this is the first year I've really done any sort of read-alongs with other content creators, and I've been having an amazing time rereading some of my favorite series. So I am currently in the middle of a read-along, or we have been for a while now, of From Blood and Ash and the prequel series with Tori from Novel Life, Issa from Blood Fantasy Books, and Hannah Blackwell. And it's just been absolutely amazing rereading my series and getting to talk about it with some of my friends. And then the A Court of Thorns and Roses series read-along, I actually met content creators through that read-along that I am still in contact with and have actually created a friendship with. So that has been an absolute blessing. And then the Stay With Me series, which is one of my favorite contemporary romance series, if you have not read it yet, I did a read-along with Tori from Novel Life. It's also one of her favorites, which was so fun to get to reread that series. And then I recently did a read-along with Cheyenne from That Tall Book Girl, where we read the Ravenhood series, which was emotional, and I cried, but it was also amazing, and it was great to talk about that series with Cheyenne, since I know she's another huge fan of the series. So just doing rereads and participating more with the bookish community has been absolutely amazing, and has made me so unbelievably happy. Next up is the most beautiful book you bought this year. So I have really cut down on buying special editions. I was buying way too many, so I've been a lot more strict this year. However, Lit Haven, I'm pretty sure that's the name of the company, recently said that they were going to be releasing To Bleed a Crystal Bloom and then the Coven special editions. Now, the Coven is one of my favorite books that I read this year, and then To Bleed a Crystal Bloom was one of my favorite fantasy romances from last year. So I was super intrigued, and then I saw the covers, and they are so pretty. So I got on a wait list, and I was ready at like 8 in the morning to try to get these special editions. I wasn't able to get the ones with like the really cool stencil edges, but I was able to get the ones with the still pretty nice sprayed edges, and I cannot wait for those books to arrive. I don't think they're shipping until like October, but I'm obsessed with these covers. And the last question is, what books do you need to read before the end of the year? There are so many, but some that stick out are Blood Mercy. So I started this book, however, it was taking me a really long time to like get invested in the story, so I ended up putting it down, but I definitely want to read it before the end of the year. Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, which I already talked about, the sequel to Serpent and the Wings of Night. The rest of A Kingdom of Stars and Shadows series, I've read the first 2 books, but I still want to read that last one. The rest of the Mafia romance series I was talking about earlier. The last book in the A Court of Blood and Blinding series. There are so many. I could go on. This could be an entire hour-long video. But overall, there's just a bunch of books, mostly fantasy romance and dark romance books, that I really need to get to before the end of the year. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. That is it for my mid-year wrap-up. Please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of the books that I talked about. And if you're considering doing the Mid-Year Freakout Tag, definitely do so. I think it's a great way just to understand people's reading tastes a little bit more, and it's just a really fun tag. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!